Hi everyone, welcome back to my Elden Ring series where I make a build for every melee weapon in the game. In this episode, I'll be covering the Regalia of Eochaid. This weapon is a straight sword that requires 12 strength, 18 dexterity, and 15 arcane to wield, and scales primarily with dexterity and arcane. It can be found at the very end of the Jail Cave in Caelid. This weapon comes fixed with a skill called Eochaid's Dancing Blade, which allows us to throw the sword a short distance with a chargeable corkscrew attack. For this build, I'm just using the Regalia of Eochaid by itself, and I'm switching back and forth between one and two handing. By far the most unique aspect of this weapon is its unique skill, which is also shared by the Mirai Executioner sword. If you land the full charged combo, it absolutely shreds enemies and is super satisfying to pull off. I will say this skill is fairly situational as it takes a decent bit of time to charge and leaves you vulnerable while you are using it. I found that it is really only reliable during very long attack windows, which not all enemies will give us on their own. Therefore, the best way to consistently create opportunities to use this skill is by staggering enemies and using it then. To help get more staggers, I decided to utilize the deflecting hard tier with this build, which allows us to perform guard counters with just our sword as long as we time our blocks perfectly. Blocking with the deflecting hard tier is a very high risk, high reward playstyle, and it is definitely a more challenging way to play. During fights where I anticipate using guard counters, I will always make sure to two-hand the sword in order to be able to use it for blocking. Once the enemies are staggered, I will unleash a fully charged corkscrew attack, which gives us far more damage than any critical attack could ever hope to. When we're not doing guard counters, it doesn't really matter if we one or two-hand the sword, because it doesn't get very good strength scaling anyway, so a lot of the times I'll just stick with one-handing. Of course, we also have just the basic straight sword moveset at our disposal to use whenever we'd like, which is very good for smaller attack windows. Moving on to my stats for the build, at level 150, I have 50 vigor, 22 mind, 26 endurance, 12 strength, 50 dexterity, 10 intelligence and faith, and 49 arcane. I would have liked to have had more health, but this is a pretty stat-hungry build, so I decided to allocate more points elsewhere. We definitely want a decent amount of mind so that we can lean into our skill. I found 22 to be plenty because it allows us to use our skill about 9 times before needing the FP flask. 26 endurance is actually just barely enough to stay at medium load with my equipment, and it also gives us a decent bit of stamina. As for damage, I went pretty much 50-50 in both dexterity and arcane, since this weapon gets equal scaling with both. For my armor set, I'm quite happy with the look that I was able to pull together. I'm using the Mirai mask, which gives us +1 arcane, bringing us to 50, followed by the Hoslo's chest armor and the fire prelate gauntlets and greaves. To me, this looks like a ceremonial armor set that would be worn by an upper-class nobleman, which matches the vibe of the sword, which also feels like a very aristocratic weapon. I like how this fit is both good-looking while also offering good protection, not to mention being pretty intimidating. For my talismans, I went with a lineup that maximizes the effectiveness of our Dancing Blade skill. I first have the Rotten Winged Sword insignia and Millicent's prosthesis, which both raise our attack power with successive attacks. The latter also gives us +5 dexterity, bringing us to a total of 55. These two talismans ramp up extremely quickly with our corkscrew attack, which continuously hits enemies very rapidly while in contact with them. Next, I have the Shard of Alexander for a boost to our skill damage, and finally the Godfrey icon for an even greater damage boost when we fully charge it. For the Flask of Wondrous Physic, I'm using the Green Burst Crystal tier for more stamina regeneration, and of course the Deflecting Hard tier to allow us to block with our weapon effectively. And that is all for this build video on the Regalia of Eochaid. Here's an overview of my setup. Thank you for watching, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.